Hi, everyone. Really glad to be here. My name is Justin Levy. I'm a senior commercialization lead with Digitalis Commons. We have a really great presentation for you here today. It's a really common experience that I think we see with our clients, with performers, with customers is really understanding the distinction between end users and buyers because that analysis becomes key in how they think about the commercializations of the technologies that get developed. So we're going to talk about that topic today. And real quick, I'll just tell you who I am. I've been at Digitalis Commons for about 6 months, but I have about 15 years experience in academic technology transfer and biotech business incubation. But I'm really honored to be joined here today by Tracy Warren, who has a lot of expertise that she's going to offer and share with us on this topic. So Tracy, I'll invite you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Justin. Welcome, everybody. As Justin said, I'm Tracy Warren. I've spent the last 20 some years doing early stage investing, largely with academic medical centers and institutions in the healthcare space. I'm currently a XIR with Digitalis Commons and serve as the lead for the Go Red for Women Fund at the American Heart Association. So very excited to be here today. I think one of the opportunities we're going to talk about, which is really just unraveling the complexities of the healthcare system, the introduction of your users and your buyers takes a lot of layers. And what we're hoping is the presentation today can really help to have you step back and strategize and think about those different stakeholders and players and how they will impact the adoption and commercialization of technologies today. Next slide. So we will talk about those different individual stakeholders across different asset classes. So whether you're developing a therapeutic, medical device, software or technology, we're going to talk about a specific case study to kind of give you some real world examples of how the consideration between a user and a buyer can impact success. We're going to give you a framework to use as you look towards commercialization or think about the commercialization of your solution. And then again, I think circling back to different stages of commercialization from early discovery through later evaluation and market assessment, how to think about those and what those considerations should be. So our healthcare system is nothing but complex, and I think this is a great graphic to help outline the different stakeholders within commercializing technologies, and that's all the way from funding sources, influencers, the general public, patients, providers, etc. And so we're going to talk through how these different stakeholders play a role in the assessment of your technology, in the commercialization of your technology, in the approval of certain technologies, and how early on you really want to start to consider those stakeholders and their interests, and whether they're aligned with your objectives or perhaps misaligned or at least in conflict with your objectives. There are often winners and losers in healthcare, and by that we mean folks who may benefit or lose, whether that be a procedure, whether that be access to a patient, whether that be information or data. And so we're going to talk through some of those features in our case study as well, and how to help you get ahead of those alignments or misalignments in thinking about your solution.
Yeah, and
And
Tracy, go ahead,
please go
sorry.
ahead, Justin.
Well, one more thing I think it would be helpful to add, I think, on that is the idea that like within the healthcare system, as you outlined, whenever a certain player like sort of is potentially has an opportunity to save money, to save cost, we're going to see that another side of another entity within that healthcare system might have an opportunity to expense costs. And so the idea that sometimes we're going to see different players having these conflicting interests, and part of that is going to be figuring out how do we get something to patients and clinician that addresses those different components.
Absolutely. And that's a great segue into talking about buyers. Things need to be purchased, whether that's by a health system, whether that's by a payer. Who is paying for the solution that you're offering, and how does that align with those incentives or misalignment? Because again, I do think you cannot ignore the fact of economics in healthcare. And to your point, is a group saving money? Are you getting higher quality scores? What are those factors that play into those considerations on whether or not to purchase or integrate a solution? In our healthcare system, we have, primary care providers, we have specialists, we have patients themselves advocating for care. Who controls that patient journey? So as you think about a disease or a condition, you really need to step in the shoes of that patient and understand that patient's journey. Who touches that patient? Who needs to refer that patient? What tests or other experts are brought into that journey? And how do we think about that when you have interdisciplinary teams or multi-chronic conditions, and understanding those motivations on those different stakeholders as that patient goes through that journey? And is that accelerating the journey or creating roadblocks in that journey? And where patients can, pay for their own or advocate for themselves, how do they play a role? And are there opportunities for business models to be set up to support that? So it just goes to say we've got a lot of complexities in how we think about introducing innovation into the healthcare system. And this will be a first of many attempts to start to unravel that complexity and see if we can help you think about it from a path of your own solution. So this is a very high level summary. We wanted to talk through the different types of technologies, and these are very broad categories. We understand there's a lot of specialty within healthcare. But I think when we think about stakeholders, those are folks who influence or otherwise are exposed to the different solutions. So on the far left, the sector side, you'll see we have biotech or pharma, we have diagnostics, devices, digital health. Obviously, services as well could play a component. And I think what we want to show here are just the different stakeholders, how they play a role in those different sectors, and then what considerations you may want to have as you think about introducing innovations or interventions in those categories. So for example, in biotechs, you think about a prescription, right? Your providers, whether they be primary care or specialists, create prescriptions. Often your health insurance plan will reimburse for those. And obviously the patients consume. Sometimes you may have a copay there. So how do we think about that? And particularly the acronym here on the right, PBMs or pharmacy benefit managers are a unique player and stakeholder in our roles as it relates to pharmaceuticals, and understanding again the alignment and economics across those stakeholders. For diagnostics, very similar. Again, I think, how do you think about those tests demonstrating not just information to the providers or showing impact for payers, but really thinking about how you commercialize diagnostic tests, whether they're screening tests, they're provided to everyone to find a disease, whether they're specific to typing a condition. All of these factors need to come into consideration when we think about economics and how they play out in the broader diagnostic space. Medical devices, those are usually both procedure codes and device codes. Who purchases often can be the hospitals that buy them in advance, but they are ultimately reimbursed typically by payers. Medical devices, not only need FDA approval, which is very important, but you still need market uptake. And so understanding once that device does receive approval, what will be the factors that drive reimbursement by payers, what evidence is required, and how do you think about that early on to set yourself up for success? And digital health really has a variety of go-to-market solutions, if you will, on who those buyers could be. Could be the health system, could be payers, could be employers, or even direct to consumers. We also can't ignore the role of electronic health records and the large players there as we think about introducing digital health solutions, particularly if they play a role in clinical care delivery. So as we understand that landscape, that one's and our example today, we'll go into this a little bit. Who are those different specific stakeholders in the digital landscape, those who have approvals to get it into the healthcare workflow, and how do we think about their role in our commercialization pathway? I don't know, Justin, if you have anything you want to add.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. I know we're about to get into a specific case study, but I think something that might also maybe give some like anecdotes and little examples to color some of this, particularly on the diagnostic side, is a really interesting one because, a diagnostic could be acknowledged as needed by a provider. Maybe payers are willing to reimburse it. But I've certainly seen, and I think, Tracy, you've probably seen that if you're not collecting the sample that's in a way that's convenient to the patient, patients are not going to comply with the diagnostic. And so this is an example of where you could get even like the economics working, but if you're not taking that end user side into account on what's convenient for the patient themselves, you still might not have a successful product. And again, also on the diagnostics, right? The idea of the way that that diagnostic is delivered, whether it's like a reference lab or a CLIA lab or at-home test or point of care, all of these have really important considerations that require the input of the clinician, the payer, the patient, because they change that convenience level, which allows for the uptake of that diagnostic to occur. So we're going to get into an example here in a second, but I thought that that could be really helpful in fleshing out how those dynamics actually work.
Absolutely. I think that's right.